Hi guys, my name's Seb Tudor. I'm the man on the Silver Mountain, and welcome back. Now, I want to talk today about the differences between men and women, because I've talked about this before. I did a couple of videos specifically addressing these kind of things in terms of what masculinity is, what femininity is, and why the argument is pointless. But there are differences, and I've had a couple of people come to me from all over the place, actually, and they've been going, oh well, they do this and they do that, and it's so frustrating. And these aren't, by the way, just relationships. It's people that have colleagues that are of the opposite sex, and so there's this frustration around it. Or people have had kind of, as said, other issues with their relationships and things, or where they just don't understand and it causes frustration and all that kind of thing. And so I wanted to go through kind of a handful of these just straight off, and kind of address the issues here, because it's like some of these things create so much frustration, and so as a result, it's a lot of frustration and stress that isn't really needed, in my opinion. You know, it's if you have this understanding, that you can understand, you can make compromises, you can work around it, and you don't need to kind of fuss and get upset about all of these things. And so, like, one of the ones that let's start off with this one, because this is one that I used to hear a lot when I worked kind of in a more either office environment, or when I was working especially in a chilled unit with lots and lots of fridges and like a proper walk-in cold storage chiller, and that is that women are much more likely to feel cold. They have a much higher kind of awareness of temperature changes, you know, and so it's interesting to pay attention to this, because in fact there was a study done that was titled energy consumption in buildings and female thermal demand, because apparently the women were looking for warmed environments, and so as a result it would potentially cause greater energy demand, but it ultimately, you know, determined that women feel colder due to differences in metabolic rate. Yeah, men burn faster and burn brighter, as it were, and so as a result they are more capable of dealing with extremes of temperature, especially the cold. You know, cold is fairly easy to deal with, relatively speaking, and so, you know, it is a bit of a frustration, especially in a cold environment where women are going, we're cold, we're always cold, and we can't help it. Please let us have more to keep us warm somewhere, somehow, please. You know, and as a result, you know, the guys going, they're always complaining that they're cold. Always complaining that they're cold. And they seem to want me to do something about it, but I can't. There's literally nothing I can do to make fridges warmer, you know. And yet the thing that stands out is yes, it's a problem, but it's actually a real problem. It's not just complaining. Women have more trouble keeping themselves at a decent, more easily regulated temperature when it is cold, you know. And as the study notes, you know, as men don't have the capacity in this case to estimate a comfortable temperature, this may cause buildings to be intrinsically non-energy efficient in providing comfort for female workers, or for ensuring that female workers are kept at a decent kind of, in a decent operating condition, whilst not overstepping on energy costs and things. And so, yeah, it is going to be an issue, a balancing act, but simply put, it's a case of working out and compromising, and it comes down to communication. As with all these things, it comes down to communication. You know, if you've got this problem and you've got female staff or a girlfriend or whatever else, and they're making it so incredibly cold, then it just comes down to communicating. Incredibly warm when it's cold. It just comes down to communicating, finding a middle ground, finding where it's comfortable for them, comfortable for you, or just having the heater on for a certain period of time to warm it up and then turning it off again, or whatever else. There are ways around it, but it comes down to communicating and realizing this is a real problem first, because if it's not regarded as a real problem, then that's where you just get frustration because they're complaining again, or they're not listening to me again, and it all goes horribly wrong from there, because that's where arguments start. The second is that women tend to need more sleep than men, and this is one that kind of hits home with me because I don't need much sleep at all. Yeah, I did shifts for an awful lot of my life. I've never slept particularly well, and so especially when I'm alone, I don't sleep that much. There's more than enough reason to have a comfy bed, but I like actually being unconscious in it is not something I spend a lot of time in. When I was doing shifts that took me into the middle of the night, and then I would be up again at like 3 a.m. in the morning to then go and work at 5 a.m. And then work through the day again, or when I was coming in at like 8 o'clock in the morning but then not going home until 2, and then still having to get back up again for like 6 to be back in for 8. Those were times that it was just a normal working week for me, and as a result I just got used to it. Secondly, it was kind of in line with the way that I was happy with anyway, so I didn't need that much sleep. But they're women on average, from a sleep researcher that wrote a book. It doesn't say what year it was published, but the book called Sleepfaring by Dr. Horn suggested that on average women are going to need probably about a minimum of 20 minutes more sleep than men do. Now, in my experience, it tends to be much more than just 20 minutes. It tends to be at least a good couple of hours. But, it does cause frustration because, it's, they're never around because they're always asleep. I'm up, I do this, I do that, I do whatever, and all I really want is for them to get up and wish me a good morning, give me a hug, and then, I'll be on my way. But they're just out cold. Half the time that I spend with them, it feels like I'm not there with them, because they're just essentially out cold in the bed next to me, and I'm sat there still essentially alone. Or if it's a case of people covering different shifts and women getting tired faster, burning out faster, and not being able to keep up rather with their male counterparts because their male counterparts don't need as much rest, then it's one of those problems where there's suddenly a weak link, and there doesn't have to be. And the biggest problem is that it's because women tend to bounce between lots of ideas, lots of things, lots of tasks very quickly, because multitasking isn't really the correct term for it, because we still work in serial. They just move between tasks faster. Because of that, the restorative function of sleep is important. The more they bounce between different things, the faster the activity is, the more it causes burnout, the longer they need to restore. And that's something that isn't often taken into account, be it in relationships, or be it in kind of work or among friends and things like that. Women need more rest on average, and it's a biological function. It's something that they need to have, and so it's one of those issues that needs to be paid attention to, that needs to be worked around. And it's tough to do in like the workplace, especially because it's a case of going, well, yes, they may need more sleep, but they have to be treated equally on the same contract, on the same shifts. And so we can try and help them out, we can try and find compromises, we can try and not disadvantage ourselves by giving them shifts that will cause them to burn out as fast, or to run low on sleep. But especially in today's day and age where you've got long shifts, long weeks, entry and above entry level jobs to any extent requiring potentially very long weeks, and numerous shifts just to keep yourself going money wise. It can be tough, but especially in a relationship, which is actually where I hear more of these complaints from. I've heard some from people in work, but tends to be more of a relationship problem. Be understanding, try and structure, try and help structure the day and things like that, so that maybe she goes to bed earlier and then you come and follow in, but try not to disturb, so she gets the extra sleep and then you still both wake up at the same time. Or just enjoy, find some solace in just being there and enjoying closeness with that person or something like that. There are ways to appreciate it, ways to work around it, ways to try and compromise, but it's a kind of balancing act when it comes to that kind of thing. Now here's one for the guys, because so far we've had two for girls, and now this one is a problem that guys experience, and that is we don't see colours as well as women do. We've got fewer receptors in our eyes that kind of ultimately go, right, we are seeing in 16-bit. That is blue. That is dark blue. This is green. That's red. They all look nice. There we go. Aren't we happy now? Whilst a woman is far more likely to be able to distinguish between very specific shades of colours and stuff like that. And as a result, when I've come across girls and women who have partners, especially, who they get so frustrated with because in the female's eyes, that person has gone and got themselves dressed and their clothes mismatch horribly, the colours clash, they make no sense whatsoever. What kind of idiot put that thing on my significant other or my friend? How have they managed to dress themselves like this without going blind in the mirror? And yet the guy's like, well, I'm wearing a white shirt with blue and blue. I mean, there's no difference. It's blue trousers and a blue jacket with a white shirt. It's what's the problem? And so it causes arguments, it causes frustration, it causes just a complete lack of confusion. Lack of comprehension, and excessive confusion. But again, it's, guys tend to be far more focused on the kind of colour-centric end of hunting and gathering. A big brown woolly mammoth or whatever that's the size of a house is rather unsurprisingly going to be easy to spot, but it's minutiae in terms of movement and things that are more necessary to be observed. You don't necessarily need to pick out kind of its specific colours, and also the more colours you see, there's a reason why night vision stuff tends to be in kind of two colours, in like black and white, grayscale kind of thing. The fewer colours, the easier it is to pick out specific details. Whilst with women, with their end of more the gathering side of things, they're going to be looking for specific plants, specific warning signs from animals and things that or insects, colours in water, stuff like that suggest that there's infection or poison or a warning. And as a result, it's paying attention to the minutiae, because you could have a bright red berry or a bright yellow berry that is poisonous as all hell, but then you've got a darker yellow or a paler red that makes them perfectly edible. And it's finding those specifics, those differences that would be hugely impactful on the survival of a group, but purely based on whether or not the person picking those berries and things would be able to kind of deal with that. And obviously this is scaled on and rolled on through our genes forever, and so as a result, kind of men tend to kind of sit with a much higher likelihood for colour blindness, and so it kind of runs into a bit of a problem. with that kind of thing, and it does lead to these daft arguments that really aren't about anything substantial. But obviously, if you're going into a situation and you don't want to be embarrassed, and you're going to see a lot of your female friends, and your male significant other has turned up in something that looks like, to you and probably to your female friends as well, like he's just walked out of a circus or something, he's just gotten out of a clown car, then there's a good chance that it's going to damage you socially. It's going to make him, and potentially by extension you, kind of the target of ridicule. And that's maybe not a huge problem, but at the same time it's something that impacts relationships. The gossip and the opinions of friends and things like that impact hugely on relationships, often when they shouldn't as well. Maybe I'll do a video on that at some point in the future. But whilst we're on the topic of seeing and eyes, let's talk about another thing that kind of I've seen this cause problems through some of the friendliest and well-meant interactions ever that have just gone horribly wrong because these things haven't been paid attention to. And it's that, women aren't as capable of seeing, on average, seeing rapidly moving objects. As said, women are there biologically speaking to focus on the evolutionary track that is gathering, that is finding, that is identifying, like, relatively speaking, stationary things and then carrying them back for food. Men, on the other hand, are hunters, so they don't necessarily need to see colour, but they definitely need to see that tiny rabbit that's just shot across the field. They need to be able to trace its movements so that they can follow it, catch it, kill it, bring it home, eat it. And so, from the way that they fell into those two roles in our kind of sexually dimorphic kind of creation and development, guys have a more developed visual cortex that allows for that kind of movement recognition and levels of hand-eye coordination. And a lot of this has to do with like the hit of testosterone that we get in the womb and stuff like that. But it's obviously an important thing. Now, where does this cause problems? Well, maybe not necessarily in vast, huge ways, but my God, have I seen a number of people get hurt and yelled at and whatever else as a result of this, because they've, I don't know, someone has asked for something and they've gone, yeah, sure, here, and they just chucked it, and it's hit someone in the head, or it's gone and dropped to the floor because they didn't know it was coming, they couldn't see where it was coming, they couldn't catch it, and so it leads to, it's just a silly little thing that causes all manner of problems. A number of times that you would end up hurling bits and pieces between a couple of guys when you're doing some kind of manual labour or you're working, then yeah, you kind of both on the same page for the most part. Doing the same to someone that's female doesn't necessarily have the same advantage. They can often ask for you to throw and stuff like that, but maybe also just taking into account that there's a good chance that a fast-moving object is not going to be something that is as easily traced. And now we're on to another one for guys, and this is that man flu is a real thing. Now, I'm not someone that's really on board with this to a degree, because when I get sick, I don't stop. I don't curl up in a ball and cry and wail and all the rest of it. I just get on with it. But I realise that there are an awful lot of guys that get hit very, very hard by any kind of ailment, possibly because they weren't in a situation where they were forced to deal with it, and so they didn't get into the pattern of doing so. But biologically speaking, we are, as men, get hit more severely by viruses and bugs and things, and it's just the men's and women's bodies act very differently to invasion from these things. So, studies have demonstrated that things like fevers, fluctuations in body temperature, inflammation, and longer recovery times tend to all be found in men rather than in women. And this started off with studies on rats and has been kind of escalated and picked up as we go, and it tends to seemingly be because, well, yeah, the immune response is not necessarily less effective, but it's just more. So where a woman's body will react, and it will react in a way that's kind of in line with the threat, it's going to tackle the threat kind of in its own time, just doing it to the kind of as optimal an amount as it can manage, and it doesn't overreact. It just kind of gets on with it. A guy's immune system goes, there's an invader, panic, and so it just flies off the handle, and alarm bells go, and so as a result, it kind of causes the guy to suddenly just shut down, solve the problem, and then get back up again, instead of just working its way out of the system. And so when you have a guy that falls over and can no longer operate, then he might be kind of bigging that up. As said, I'm one of these people that if I get sick, then unless I get really, really sick, unless I'm kind of attached to the toilet and cannot move for like 2 days or something, then I'll still, as long as I'm not putting other people at risk, I'll carry on and I'll keep going and I'll deal with whatever, regardless of how sick I am. But if there are a lot of people that when they get hit with a bug, they just go down like a sack of shit, and they're just not able to function anymore. And so, don't always berate those people. Yeah, they could probably do more, but at the same time, that guy is probably actually suffering because his body has responded so violently to whatever threat, whatever bug he's been hit with, compared to a woman, compared to your either whoever I'm talking to. If you happen to be female, cut him a little bit of slack, maybe not too much, but just a little bit, or just be appreciative of the fact that his body is literally trying to shut itself off again to restart and cleanse itself. Don't worry too much about still giving him a hard time about being a massive pansy for falling over it in the first place. That's fine. But also, here's one of the things that often gets thrown around a lot, and this is about who talks more. And so, for the most part, women do tend to talk more, but they don't necessarily speak more all the time. There are occasions where where women will spike in their conversation, as it were, compared to guys. So guys tend to have a kind of a greater level of conversation during, or at least to the same amount during a kind of casual encounter where you're sat around at lunch and you're just having a chat and whatever else. But when it comes to actually working, when it comes to being functional, when it comes to achieving goals, women tend to be far, far, far more communicative. Communication comes into it an awful lot more. They talk a lot more, and they don't just get on with it. They have to converse. They have to interact. And so this ends up having a whole load of different problems, because obviously when you've got a group of guys and you've got one girl come in, then it's a case of they're just used to, when it comes to doing work, they just go and work, and yet that female addition to the team is left kind of high and dry because there's not someone to communicate with. They're not going to be communicating to the same extent, and if they do try to communicate, then it's often going to be interrupting the work process of someone else. But with a group of women and a guy coming in, then it tends to be that he just wants to get on with the job. He's just going to focus on the job and so on and so forth. But then, for the most part, there's a larger spike in conversation amongst the rest of the team, and that guy is either being left out or the rest of the team is wondering why he's not getting involved. And so it causes these issues, and this is something that was brought up with the Google memo by James Damore, where he was saying like software and tool development would potentially be kind of an advantageous thing if it also incorporated for those who were more communication focused and more group work focused and more towards the female end of working here. Then allow for tools and systems that would allow for them to better use those communication skills and that inclination towards communicating to achieve goals, whilst guys just want to get on with it and so don't necessarily make the tools available to them, obviously, for if they ever need to use them, but for the most part they can be left to operate within their own sphere silently, quietly, just getting on with it until the job is done. And then obviously next thing that has to happen there is the communication between the two. And this was all addressed, but unfortunately there's an element of society at the moment that doesn't want to acknowledge these differences as actual biological differences based in the way that our brains operate, based in the way that we have evolved as two sides of the same coin. And so, it kind of leads to a problem. But anyway, that's 6 things, the 6 key differences that cause a huge number of arguments in all manner of different areas, both in terms of relationships and in terms of kind of work, especially. Those are the 2 big areas that I tend to deal with these things as well. And so as a result, you've got this huge kind of area that could just be of arguments and discussions and fuss that could be minimised and dealt with quite happily if all people did was kind of tackle this directly and communicate around it and be aware of it more. But anyway, is there anything else you guys would add to this list in regards to either men or women or anywhere in between that people do that you feel maybe should have some more attention paid to it? Maybe some ideas for me to go and take a look at some other stuff in that sphere in other videos even. Let me know down in the comments. But otherwise, guys, thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you in the video tomorrow. Take care. Thank you very much for watching, guys. If you enjoyed this video, then please drop us a like, share this video, and subscribe for more. And I'll see you in the video tomorrow. Take care.